In this video, we're going to look at going beyond using 4 horns and drop 2 voicings. Now, we can go up to 5 horns, 6 horns. The sky's the limit. Big bands have sometimes a dozen horns. But in pop-style music, smaller ensembles are more stylistically correct. So in this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about approaches for 5-horn voicings, and then I'm going to play you a little arrangement I did incorporating a bunch of different techniques, and we'll look at it more closely and hear what they sound like and examine them. But one thing we can do when we're working with 5 horns is we can still use closed position voicings. And what we do is we double the top note down an octave. So the entire 5-note voicing happens within an octave, and the top and bottom note are doubled. And that gives us a nice tight voicing. There's usually a small interval in there somewhere of either a half tone or a tone, and that's a nice sound. We can still use drop 2. There's drop 3 voicings as well, where you drop the third voice down an octave. And we can use more open voicings where you just have the root down low on a bari sax and maybe have the 7th up higher. So you can have much wider intervals where the chords are spread apart. And a more modern approach is to voice in fourths, intervals of a fourth. And it's a little bit more of a jazz sound. It's not quite a pop stylistic thing to do, but it has its places. And I'm going to show you some of it in this little example here. So those are a couple of ideas for working with 5 horns. And what I want to do now is play this little arrangement, and we'll follow along, and then we'll look at what's going on more closely. And it's a blues in G. And into a trumpet solo. So I'm going to solo the horns, and we'll look more closely at what's going on. And I'm using Session Horns Pro here: trumpet, alto sax, tenor sax, trombone, and baritone, which is a very common configuration for 5 horns, although sometimes you might have 2 trumpets or 2 of either alto or tenor. There's all kinds of possibilities. Now, to start with, I'm using open voicings on this G7. I have a D and then an A, so that's a nice big wide interval down of a 5th, or 4th rather, and then I'm going to the F over here underneath, and the trombone is playing the B, or the 3rd, and then I have the G way down low. So a nice big open voicing. And here I'm going for this da-da-ga-da phrase that happens over and over again. I'm using fourths. So it's a little bit unusual in that we're not spelling it out clearly with the 3rd and 7th, but again, it's a sound. So we have G, D, and then A, E, and B. So we don't even technically have the 4th here. So let's listen to this first few bars where we have this big open voicing and then fourths over here, and we're alternating back and forth with that. So very different sound, especially when you have the bari down low like that with a big octave of a 7th or a 10th even, and you get a nice big wide sound versus the fourths, which are closer, not as close as closed position, but still closer. And then we're moving up to the C7 where I'm doing the same kind of thing here. And here I have the 9th on top. And again, nice big wide voicing with the C down low up to the B flat here. So it's a 7th interval. So I'm having the bari play a little bit independently here as well to do that little run up to the tonic, the G to C on the C7th, which again is stylistically in pop music often done, especially with bigger brass sections. And then it's playing together with the rest of the horns for these chords. I'll play that for you again. So here, I'm using articulation switching. I'm using a fall-off articulation here. And I'm using a pretty conservative, relatively tight voicing for the D7. From the bottom up, we're playing the C down low, so it's kind of like an inversion with the 7th and the bass. And then I'm going up to the E, which is the 9th, the F sharp, the A, and then the D on top. And then here, I'm using extensions or an altered chord. I'm using the sharp 9, the F natural, which is a very distinctive type of sound, which I need to reiterate again, may or may not fit in the type of pop music you're doing, but it's a colorful chord where I have the sharp 9 here, then the 7th, and then the 3rd. I like this big wide voicing of F sharp, C, F. That's a nice 3-horn voicing for that. And then I'm having the E flat here, which is the flat 9. So the flat 9 and the sharp 9, it's a very, I don't want to say dissonant, but a chord that contains a lot of extensions. And then the C over here. So we're not hearing the root, which is fine. And then on the C7, again, I'm pretty inside here with the 5th and the 9th. It's kind of like a C9 chord, the E, the B flat, and the C. Big open interval here. And then back to the G7. But again, we have a nice drop down here of an octave. So I'm jumping down to the Barry. I'm going to play these 2 bars and listen to the difference in the quality of this voicing, where the Barry's up higher here, and in this voicing where it's more spread out between the trombone. So back to the 4ths over here. And finally, on the last D7, I have the sharp 9, the sharp 5 here, which is, again, a nice colorful extension to use. And then the F sharp, the C, and then the root down here. So an interval of a 7th between these 2 low notes. And then on this last note, I have the sharp 5 on top. So this is very high for the trumpet, or fairly high. And again, it's got a certain quality because it's a higher register. It's kind of a higher energy type of part. And even for the alto, it's the very high end of the range. And it's high for all the instruments, not so much the Barry, but the higher range, so it's intense. And what I'm doing here in this next course is I'm breaking them off into 2 parts. I'm having the alto and the Barry play in octaves, and they're doing a kind of unison octave line, which draws a lot of attention. It's kind of a hook, a riff. And then I'm having the other 3 horns fill in with some nice short shots. So voicing 3-note chords with the trumpet, tenor, and trombone. And fairly inside, I have the G here, and then the B, and then the F. So it's basically root, or rather 3rd and 7th with the root on top. I could put the A on top if I wanted, and that would make it more interesting. In fact, let me play these couple of bars as is, like this. So that works nicely, and let's listen with the A on top. I like it better with the G in this case, but either works. And we continue with that riff, with the kind of call and response. And then I'm having the alto and Barry join in the tutti playing, tutti meaning all playing at once when we get to the longer chords. I'll continue playing. C7. And it makes a very nice voice leading when we go down to the C7. I'm just moving by a half tone. So the 3rd and 7th of the G7 become the 7th and 3rd in the C7. So here is where I have the Barry sax and the alto sax join the ensemble for these sustained notes. And they spread out into wider 5-note voicings instead of these 3-note voicings here. And again, here we're moving from the 3-note voicing to a fuller 5-note voicing with the Barry down low, so it's a nice different quality. So these are some ideas on how you can combine some of the different strategies and techniques we've looked at in some of these videos together in one unified part. So on this D7 at the end, we have this nice interval of a 10th down low for nice big wide open voicing, root 3rd, 7th, then the sharp 5 on top, and then the sharp 9 over here. So a nice colorful chord with a lot of extensions. So what I want to do at this point is wrap up with a little summary of some of the key takeaways from this series that I think are useful to keep in mind as you approach arranging your own horn parts. So let's look at a little recap here. Unisons and octaves are great for hooks and lines that you want to have stand out. It's the easiest way to arrange, and they always sound good, and that's easy to fall back on. When you want to start getting into harmonies, voicing in 3rds and 6ths are the most consonant approach to using 2 horns. They're very sort of safe and sweet sounding, kind of vanilla depending which chord tones you use, but you won't go wrong with 3rds and 6ths generally as long as you're using chord tones or at least scale tones. Another approach for two horns is using the third and seventh degree of the underlying chords, and that allows the horns to reinforce the chord progression more. So it's a different type of part. If you have something more melodic, voicing in thirds and sixths works nicely. If it's more punchy and you want just emphasis and shots or swells, thirds and sevenths are nice. And when you want to add another voice on, a root or fifth is a nice, safe, conventional note to add on. But you can add color tones instead of the root and fifth for more interesting sounding chords. For example, instead of the root, you can use the ninth. Instead of the fifth, you can use the 13th. You also need to be aware of the range of the instruments. Horn parts have very different qualities when the parts are played in different areas of their ranges. So there's the nice, safe, kind of sweet spot range in the middle of their registers where they'll sound nice and comfortable. Higher ranges are generally a bit more exciting, a bit more energy, usually a bit louder because it's harder for them to control their dynamics when they're playing up high. And lower ones are kind of warmer, darker, generally a bit quieter. So possible approaches when we're using four horns, and this opens up more possibility. We can use closed position where all the notes fall within an octave and we choose the nearest chord tone above or below. We have drop two position where we drop the second voice down an octave. We can use the approach of thirds and sevenths with two color tones or chord tones added, or we can use triads with some of the notes doubled to reinforce those notes in the voicing. We can use fourths, a little more of a modern sound, or we can use wide open voicings with the notes spread far apart. In general, the faster the part is, the more you want to stay with tighter voicings so that there's no awkward skips and leaps between the inner voices. So that leads me to this point here, to be aware of voice leading of the inner parts so that you can avoid large skips unless you want that effect. And avoid using an interval of a minor ninth when you're using multi-horn voicings, unless it's with the root on the bottom and the flat ninth on top. It doesn't sound good if you have, let's say, the sharp nine on the bottom and the third on top. You can try it and see for yourself, but it's not a great sound. And the 13th is usually used as a substitute for the fifth in dominant chords when you're using extensions. So try and avoid using both the fifth and the 13th together in the same voicing. It's not commonly done. Just a couple of programming things to be aware of. Make sure to use different articulations to make your parts more realistic. And I haven't been focusing on this in the videos, but always remember to vary your velocities and note lengths and start positions of your notes when they're playing together. If your sampled instruments don't have a humanized function, and both the instruments I've used in these videos do, the Vintage Horns has built-in imperfections built into the sampling, and Session Horns Pro has some knobs for controlling the amount of humanization or randomization. So this is Eli Kranzberg signing out. I hope you found this series useful. And what I'm going to do is end off with a little bit of music. I'll replay you this example, and you can listen and look and hopefully get some ideas on how you want to start using horns in your own music.